Hello and welcome to our first Chief Diversity Officer podcast. My name is Pam Noble, and I'm the Managing Partner and Practice Leader for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the TCG Group. Today we have the honor of speaking with Troy McIntosh. Troy serves as the Senior Director of Diversity and Inclusion at U.S. Cellular in Chicago. Troy joined U.S. Cellular in 2016 to lead the organization's diversity and inclusion practice. He currently leads U.S. Cellular's diversity and inclusion leadership team, overseeing strategy, development, and tactical implementation in the areas of diversity, talent management, inclusion, associate resource groups, government compliance, and supplier diversity. Prior to joining U.S. Cellular, Troy also worked at Johnson Controls, Abbott Laboratories, United Airlines, and Proactive Corporation, where he continued to build upon his diverse knowledge of diversity and inclusion. He holds a degree in psychology and philosophy from the University of Notre Dame, as well as a master's in social service administration from the University of Chicago. Welcome, Troy.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Thanks.
So what we would love to do is really focus on the changing dynamics of diversity and how it's played out in the workplace, especially after the recent events. How has your organization responded, and how is that different than in the past?
That's a really good question. So I would say that the thing that's been very different for us, we have had all of the, maybe you'd say, traditional parts of D&I strategy that you would expect. We do work in supplier diversity. We have representation targets, lots of great inclusion work. We've actually in building cultural competence of our leaders and trying to build a more inclusive workplace. So we were doing all that work already committed to it, already very well invested in that work. I would say what's been a little bit different is that for our organization, after the death of George Floyd, I would say the melding of our external brand presence, in other words, how we show up in the marketplace from a marketing, customer brand perspective, quickly melded with how we show up internally. So much more candid conversations internally around issues of racial equity, our stance to support the Black community, the way that we are doing that in the communities where we do business, and we were already doing work there. We already have great partnerships with organizations like Urban League. We work with lots of organizations. We actually do a lot of work with the Boys and Girls Club. So lots of focus with inner cities in the areas where we work, and with people of color in general, relationships with, organizations in engineering and in the business world as well. But I think what we saw that changed was an immediate, almost like a 3-week immediate impact on how we were holding ourselves accountable against that work. So not only are you doing that work, but how can you demonstrate that the impact you're having in the community is impacting historical racial inequities in the organization? So I think that's the main thing that immediately changed after the death of George Floyd.
I remember a conversation where you said that, kind of for the first time, you guys have always been more outwardly focused, but there was a pressure growing within the organization. How did that come about?
Once again, after the death of George Floyd, people within our organization were looking at what other companies were saying, the way they were showing up with respect to Black Lives Matter. Our organization had been, I would say, both naturally humble, even from a marketing perspective. The way that we demonstrate our value in the marketplace was very often like, we're steady Eddie, we care about our customers, not the most bold company when it comes to the way that we marketed ourselves. So that brand was similar internally, where there's a lot of work that we've been doing in the area of D&I, but we constantly kind of talk about our values and the fact that we do the right thing and we're consistently doing the right thing. Well, when you don't really show up externally very frequently when it comes to issues of social justice, people within your organization might think maybe you're not doing anything. We started to take a lot of calls from frontline associates that wanted to know more about our diversity strategy. I mean, the specifics of it, right? Like how we were engaging with specific communities across the country, how we were actually having impact on local metrics in the communities where we did business. So we just got a quick uptick in terms of wanting to demonstrate those things. And frankly, that was new for us as a company in general, right? To have our associates so engaged with how we show up in the community. So, but I think ultimately it's been a good thing because our story is actually pretty strong.
Wow, that's incredible. So, we've talked a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it has so many components. How would you advise other organizations to prioritize those components?
We, like other companies, have different thrusts to our strategy. Like I said, we focus on representation and equity, right? So we want to see equity all through our management ranks in terms of diversity of the leaders and the frontline associates that we have in the organization. We focus on inclusion and building skill and cultural competence. We focus on supplier diversity. I would say if I had to pick one, right, and this is kind of a hard choice, right, but I would say if a company can build its culture around inclusion while it's building representation, that would be the priority. I mean, we're also doing work in supplier diversity, but, inclusion work and representation work are sort of like the chicken and the egg, right? Like what comes first? If you recruit diverse talent to an organization that's not culturally competent, they will probably leave. And if you don't have people of difference in the room, you really don't have inclusion, right? I mean, like by definition, inclusion requires some difference or it's just meaningless. So I would say making sure that as an organization attempts to improve its internal racial or gender or orientation composition, building cultural competence and inclusion skills at the same time is really important, right? So you don't have this situation where you're bringing people into an organization that is not equipped to leverage and support their difference.
So, Troy, one of the things that you and I have talked about is these podcasts are to serve as educational tools for those organizations that can't afford to put somebody over their diversity, equity, inclusion in their organization. So with that being said, if you have an HR leader or even a business head who really want to make positive change in their organization, what advice would you give them?
I would say start by surrounding yourself with experts. Like, don't shoot from the hip on this. It's a field, right? And even on my team, I mean, I have a person who has expertise in diverse talent or expertise in just in the inclusion and OD component, or even historically affirmative action. So I would say when you're getting started, right, there are lots of great organizations that you can go to. Organizations like Diversity Best Practice, Diversity Inc., the Human Rights Campaign. There are lots of organizations. Some of them are nonprofits, but they would include experts that can help you to get educated. So I would say start with experts. Find some nonprofits and maybe even some for-profit organizations, some organizations you can partner with that can help you to begin to build out that strategy and really build out your approach. But I would just say don't shoot from the hip. It's a fully developed field. Even, some may even disagree that as a role, that the role should sit in HR, right? Because it is also impacting the way you show up with your customers or the way you show up with your supplier base. So I would say don't shoot from the hip. Partner with some experts and get some help so that you can have some direction.
Troy, thank you so much. This has been a great opportunity for us to talk about what is becoming an increasingly more important topic in not only in the workforce but in the world today. So I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks.